So hey, it's been a long time no see. Obviously nobody watching this will know this, but last time I spoke with you was 2019. I think that would have been right before was either East 9's localization or like Cold Steel 4, one of the two, I think.
Yes, it's been a while. I'm really happy that you always play the East games.
This seems like it's a major anime expo for you guys. Like, I don't know when this is going live, but this is being recorded right before Anime Expo starts itself, like on day zero, if you were. So, like, obviously, NIS America has a number of announcements, and a number of games are showing. Today, we're just going to be playing East 10 for a little bit and a little bit of Daybreak, I think. How's it been, like, so far in the States for the first time in, I guess, 5 years?
The food portions are quite large here in America.
But all right, I guess start off playing some East 10. I guess the first question I'd have is, this is the first East title on Falcom's new engine that they started off with Daybreak. So both of the games we're going to be playing today are on that new engine, and this seems to be a pretty big difference from how the last couple of East titles were, like East 8 and East 9. The party system's gone. Now there's just like the duo with Adol and Karja. I guess to start with, what kind of inspired that shift?
We used the same engine that was developed for Trails Through Daybreak. However, when we started development on East 10, we had mainly released the East titles only on PlayStation platforms. We wanted to have Switch owners be able to enjoy the East series as well, so the first step was to make sure the game supported Switch. For the past 4 games in the series, East was an action game with a 6-member party. As the 10th entry, this is a milestone title, so we wanted to approach the battle system from the ground up. We went with only 2 playable characters because we first decided to reflect on what we had done in the past, and the party system in particular. For a 6-member party, each person needs their own story beats, so that means we can do many things narratively. However, when it comes to combat, out of the 6 playable characters, most players settle on 3 and don't use the other 3 much. That didn't really sit right with me, and it always bugged me. I thought it was a waste for those 3 characters who weren't used. So instead, we could use those resources needed to create them, such as graphics and their skills and the effort put into creating their stories, and shift all that to 3 or even 2 characters. We went back and forth on whether to have 3 or just go all out and make it 2, but in the end we decided that with 2, we could really put the focus on Adol and his partner, the heroine, and make the combat much richer and add more depth to the game overall. Our aim was to see if we couldn't create a different battle system this time, which was a different approach to battle creation than what we had taken before in East. By reducing the playable characters to just 2, it really made the development staff get serious. First of all, combat has to be fun. So when you have 6 party members, if one falls by the wayside, that's okay. But with 2 characters, you don't have that luxury. So we dedicated a lot of resources to Adol and Karja. As the scenario writer, I also had to ensure that Karja was likable. Otherwise, the game wouldn't even get off the ground. Because if the player doesn't like her, they won't like the game. So I had to think carefully about how to make Karja likable to the player, what kind of character to make her, and what her role would be in the story, as well as what kind of relationship she would have with Adol. I thought very carefully about these things.
I didn't realize that you were the scenario writer for East 10. That's actually a really big surprise for me.
For East, yeah. How long has it been? I've been the East scenario writer for a while now, and I think up the main story for each game as well as write the text. For East 6, I only helped out a bit with that, but I started writing the main game from, the one with Unica. What was that again? Oh, right, East Origin. After that, 8, 9, 10... were all me taking care of the main story.
One thing you mentioned was that Falcom's new engine, one of the main focuses was to get it working on Switch. I remember actually recently during an investor Q&A that you mentioned that originally Falcom themselves wanted to get East 10 on Steam day and date in Japan. So was like not just Switch, but other platforms potentially in the future another reason for the engine shift?
So the reason we decided to develop our own in-house game engine is actually for a different reason. Before, we used to use Sony's Fire engine, and before that, we did indeed use our own in-house engines. So almost each title used a different engine. East had its own in-house East game engine, and the Trails series had its own in-house Trails game engine. So when, for example, the graphic designers would work on either, the development environment was completely different, and they struggled with that. So originally, in order to unify our internal development environment, we wanted to unify our internal game engine.
What was the prevailing reason to go with a new custom engine then over something like more standardized like Unreal? Because I feel like, especially nowadays, Unreal and Unity are de facto standard engines, even in Japan.
When we were using Sony's engine, they, of course, gave us excellent support, but we would encounter bugs that we couldn't really get to the bottom of. We didn't know whether they stemmed from issues on our side or if they were related to the game engine itself. We felt that it was very difficult to pinpoint where these bugs were stemming from, and it caused us a huge headache. We would spend an inordinate amount of time during debug just to pinpoint something that might, in the end, have stemmed from the game engine itself. We felt it was best for our engineers to completely understand the engine, so we decided to go back to our own internal engine. Falcom has existed for 40 years now, but we have a tendency to repeat the same thing over and over again. Internal engine, external engine, back to internal engine, and so on. I do think that both have their merits, though. For an external engine, it's much cheaper, and you can get something running from very early on in the development process, which is something I would say is a superior aspect of it. On the other hand, as I said before, you don't know the ins and outs of it as well, so it takes time to figure out where bugs are originating from, and for that, I would say an internal engine is better. When using an external engine, you feel like an internal one is better, and when using an internal engine, the opposite is true. So amid this repetition, the founder of the company, Mr. Kato, would cut in and say, "We know that internal is better, so just go ahead and use an internal engine."
It's very impressive considering that this engine's only been in use for just under 3 years now at this point. Like the variety of like gameplay systems that like even within 2 games that we're going to be playing today, or like obviously East 10, you have obviously the dungeons, you have the fields, but you also have the ship combat, which is entirely different. Like the basically overworld stuff with having to basically move around on a ship, which to kind of like take a detour. What was the like thought process of being like, we're going to have Adol suddenly become a renowned captain? I know that Falcom is in on the joke. You guys have like made jokes about it all the time about how like Adol like shouldn't be anywhere near a boat. He always crashes. But in East 10, the whole thing is he's a great captain.
It's because from the very beginning, we wanted East 10 to be, from a genre standpoint, a purely juvenile adventure. And so we think of what Adol has yet to do in terms of adventures. Till now, practically every time he gets on a ship, it sinks somewhere, and then the adventure begins from there. But Adol never had the opportunity to actually travel around in-game on a ship. So we thought that if we could portray that, it would be something new, which was our initial goal. Yes, in Japan, when we announced the game, just like you said, James, the players said, "Adol on a ship? What a terrifying thought."
People have to play and see to see if there's any boats that sink in East 10.
Whatever ship Adol gets on seems to sink. I guess you could say one thing to be on the lookout for in this game is indeed whether or not his ship will sink.
As someone that has played through a Daybreak, even though obviously there's all these callbacks, this feels like the first real like proper new entry point for players in a decade.
The Trails series has been continuing for 20 years now, and when the main character and setting change, there are a large number of new players who start the games. So for example, after the Sky trilogy, you had people starting the series with Zero, which came directly after. However, Naturally, those who played Azure had already played Zero. So if we didn't periodically change the setting and main character, new players can't really come aboard. This is a very deliberate thing that we do. So for Trails Through Daybreak, the setting is the Republic of Calvard, and Reen is not the main character, as we had already decided to have a new main character. Since the series has been going on for 20 years, there are those who like Sky best, others who like the Crossbell games, and still others who like Cold Steel. It really depends on where they first play the games and the content of those games. Even though they might all be fans of the series, they aren't a monolith in terms of which arc they prefer in particular. There are those who say, I liked Crossbell, but didn't really care for Cold Steel. There are also many who have continuously played all the games. So it really is all types. I think it's because we do periodically update the setting that the fans have stayed with us all these years.
One of the main things, like even before launch, that I was interested in, like before I had the chance to play it, was the whole system of how you can transition seamlessly between like on-field combat into the command battles, which is really interesting because that's a bigger deal, becoming a bigger deal for RPGs now with like even like Atlas doing a similar system this year with Metaphor ReFantasio. I know that in the past, like Falcom has made it a point that they want to be a trendsetter for the industry. Was that like one of the defining reasons for the new system in Daybreak, or was there another reason for the change?
Yes, JRPGs mainly feature turn-based combat. In Trails Through Daybreak, because the game engine has changed and the main character and setting have changed and are new, one thing we wanted to do was to make a new battle system as well. One of the issues we wanted to address was the poor tempo of battle and how long battle took. That said, we didn't want to just make it completely an action game since we thought that turn-based combat has its own strengths. Debating the merits of either system is something we have debated as JRPG directors. But, for us, we wanted to stick to turn-based. However, in order to improve the tempo of combat, we wanted to incorporate some real-time elements. With Trails Through Daybreak, as a first step towards that, we have aimed for something that hasn't been done before, as well as something that feels like an evolutionary step forward, so that players won't be frustrated that things are taking a long time and the game isn't proceeding smoothly. Amongst Japanese JRPG fans, there are actually many who don't care for action games. And for those people, what they've told us is that what they don't like about them is, even though they want to think carefully about what to do, action games don't really give them the time to do that. So, because of that, and because we also wanted to continue using it, we've gone with the turn-based system in Trails Through Daybreak.
So you mentioned that, like, with Daybreak, as with many new Trails arc, you wanted to make things feel completely fresh. But Daybreak, for as much as it is, like, brand new, it also feels like a bit of a return to form in some of the design. The orbit system, for example, it's not like a carbon copy of any previous system in the series, but the way the lines work and the way the buffs work, depending on the, like, elemental values of the quartz you slot into each line, reminds me more of, like, the Burl and Crossbell's systems. And similarly, the structure of Daybreak's chapters and the focus around the main hub city of Calvard reminds me a lot of Crossbell, in the sense that there's the different districts. Like, obviously, like Cold Steel has always had a hub with the different campuses and whatnot, but the way the structure feels in Daybreak does remind me of Crossbell. So it does feel kind of like a melting pot, kind of like Calvard is itself, of like the series history alongside everything new added to the table.
For the orbment system, actually, the game designer for the battle system from this game is someone who is new to the company, who really liked that aspect of the Sky games, where players could fiddle around with orbment in order to develop and gain access to new arts. This person wanted to revive the fun aspect within the game, and asked if it would be okay to do so. As for how the story proceeds, going to various locations, then returning to a main base of operations was something that the scenario writer came up with, and you could say it resembles the Crossbell games a bit. In Crossbell, you have the special support section, and this game has the Spriggan. In the case of the special support section, they are a public-facing apparatus of the police department, whereas the Spriggan is a self-employed person and sometimes does detective work. I think this works well for Van, since he can actually even take on work from Ouroboros and various other people and organizations. This also allows him to go to many different places, so I think it's fair to say that this aspect might have some referencing from Trails from Zero.
Yeah, Van as a main character reminds me quite a bit of Kevin from Trolls in the Sky III, where he has something in his past that obviously through the course of the story comes to light, and you find out more about why he might have this gruff attitude, why he might have a bit of an edge to him. But can I just say, I love Van as a protagonist. He's probably, like, I remember even playing this at Japanese launch, immediately was like, oh man, nailed it. It's really fascinating because, like, yeah, like I just said, he reminds me of Kevin in a way, but I don't think there's been a main character in the Trails series that has also kind of been the mentor role for the rest of the party. What was the idea behind that? Because, like, it's very, very different from, like, the rest of the series. I guess, like, Reen and Cold Steel 3 and 4 as the teacher is a bit of it, but from the get-go, like, in Daybreak, it's like, yeah, Van is the main character, but he's also, like, shepherding the rest of the party as the story goes on.
The Republic of Calvard has a complex societal structure, so the biggest difference is in the societal position of the main character. Previously, our main characters were bracers, police officers, and students of military academies, people who you might say are allies of justice. But here in Calvard, there are several powerful underworld organizations, and the society is comprised of people of various ethnic origins. Also, as a backdrop, the country itself is working on a big project, so it was necessary to have a main character who had some kind of access to these various factions. In order for this person to have access, they needed to be an adult, and from a positional standpoint, they couldn't be someone like a police officer, since they naturally wouldn't then be able to take on jobs from the criminal underworld. So then, thinking about who could take on jobs like this, it needed to be someone who existed in what you could call a gray zone, who could access the underworld, but, on the other hand, still be able to effectively interact with public services and government organizations. From this, the character of Van was born. At first, one idea was to have him be an Ouroboros enforcer, but if we did that, then that would be a little too unbalanced from the perspective of being towards the underworld too much. So, while thinking up the perfect position for him, what we landed on was his job of a Spriggan.
In previous games, like, you had bracers, you had police officers, you had military academy students. One thing that struck me when playing through this game at Japanese launch was just how, like, in previous entries in the series, even if on the surface, like, when it came to side quests and whatnot, you're coming from a different position, they even kind of joked about it in Trails from Zero, where it was like, yeah, you're basically a bracer. The special support section is basically, you are bracer cops. And, like, even in Cold Steel, like, the whole point was, like, Sarah was kind of trying to get Reen to be a bit more like a bracer in what he did. The side quests in Daybreak are, like, you still have a lot of, like, the same sort of side quests. You have, like, monster extermination and whatnot, standard stuff. But, like, narratively, a lot of these side quests are very, very different from what has come before. And I do like how it kind of plays into the new, like, LGC alignment system. What was the ideas behind that?
The thing about Van is that he can communicate with those on both sides of the law. And while we could have portrayed this simply via the story, we wanted something in the gameplay to reflect it as well. By doing so, we felt that the player would better be able to understand Van and his position in society. That system was actually also developed by the person who made the battle system, and he presented that idea, and we implemented it.
One thing that's fascinating to me, you mentioned that, like, obviously Calvard as a republic and universe is a multifaceted society. One thing that I think is really interesting, having played through the game, is just how much of a focus, like, the different cultures that make up the Calvard Republic are kind of, like, showcased in Daybreak, to the point where it's, like, one of the core themes of, like, the arc as a whole, at least so far, is how, like, there's all these different sorts of people from different walks of life and, like, what they kind of contribute to Calvard as a whole. What led to that idea for the game?
For the Erebonian Empire, it was a class-based society with nobility and commoners. Accordingly, the problems and issues that were portrayed were based on that theme. For the Republic of Calvard, of course, it would have its own varied problems and issues, so we had to think about what kind of country it is to reflect those things. At the start, we thought carefully about these things. Unlike the Erebonian Empire, many things were clearly decided from the start. We had simply been doing what we had wanted to do to the best of our abilities for 20 years. But naturally, our staff had aged that much as well, and when it came time to finally think about how to depict this country, we thought about the society we were living in, and we kept those things in mind as we decided to depict something relatively close to reality, with ethnic issues, political issues, and the like. We could have just had a happy Genki girl like Estelle, like we did 20 years ago, but we were going towards a more adult vector this time. Accordingly, when we thought about the Republic of Calvard, we knew it had problems related to ethnic tensions as well as historical ones. You'll see more of those historical issues in the next game. Due to making things more realistic, I think that players will find that we were able to create a new type of story compared to anything else in the series.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like it lands, and I would be shocked if people don't resonate with the themes in this game. Like you said, a lot has changed. You guys have been working on the Trail series for 20 years now. It's the 20th anniversary. I guess to close things off, is there anything specifically you'd want to tell anyone, like either a new fan or an old fan of, like, not just Trails, but Falcom in general?
The Trails series now has 13 titles in it. Still, even though it has been continuing for so long, there are still many out there who haven't tried any yet. With a 20-year history, many people out there are apprehensive and wonder if it's okay to jump in the middle. But with this change of setting and main character, now is a great time to start. So, if someone out there thought Trails Through Daybreak looked cool, but couldn't decide whether or not they could start here, we definitely want them to and encourage them to do so. For those who have played all the Trails games up till now, I think one of the biggest draws will be to finally see Calvard, which is a place that has been talked about for so long. Also, over the past 20 years of the series' history, there have been various things that have remained shrouded in mystery. This world has many secrets, and here in Trails Through Daybreak, we will finally start to get to the core of them. So I'd like for longtime fans to pay attention to those aspects as well. Also starting with Daybreak 1, there will be some familiar faces making reappearances. In fact, a journalist in Japan remarked how seeing a certain character made them feel like they were watching over their own daughter's growth. I think you can only get that kind of reaction from spending 20 years with something. This is something that can only really be experienced in the Trails series, and I want people to experience those kind of feelings. As we've talked about, we have the East series and the Trail series. The Trail series has continued for 20 years now, and the story is reaching its core. We as the developers, who have been working on the series for so long, want to end the series in a way we are proud of. Of course, we want to create an ending that also satisfies the players. So we really want the players to pay careful attention to what happens in Daybreak.
特にこれ以降の展開には奇跡は本当に注目してほしいなと思ってます。それからイースに関してはもう本当に
Ys is a series that has been continuing for 36 years, and in order for it to continue, there are some things that we must change, and even though it is a series with much history, we need to create new challenges for ourselves with it. We will give it our all to continue both series.
で、2つのシリーズを続けてきてるんですけれど、やっぱり長くスタッフも関わっているので新しいことがやりたいっていうスタッフも出てきていて、実はファルコムの社内でちょっと
Our staff has worked long and hard on both, and there are many who want to try their hands at brand new things. And we are actually working on some brand new projects. One is the previously announced Tokyo Xanadu, but we also have others as well.
それ以外にもさらに用意しているものがあります。で、日本ファルコムとしてはやっぱりシリーズとして続けていく。
So, we will continue to make titles for our series and do our best to bring you brand new titles as well. So please continue to follow our work.
注目していただければなと思います。はい。